then he started showing me videos of him molesting other children that I knew, and videos that he had taken with his girlfriend that I knew that I loved. And it turned out that she was also doing this as well.
After I have that first one, I'm no longer in control. I really wanted to quit. And then I would wake up the next morning and have no choice. I'd lost my identity and I didn't know who I was. I just had nothing left. And I needed help so bad. It all came down on me. I could not pull myself out of it. I had hit rock bottom. I just knew I was gonna die. And I remember just praying that foxhole prayer, like, God, please just get me through this moment. I'll stop doing bad. I will stop everything. The goal of my podcast is to not only educate people on, mental health, but also let people know that they're not alone.
So what was early childhood like and growing up?
It was a bit complex. It was a bit difficult. I grew up in Queens, New York, which was not the best area. And where I was in South Ozone Park, it's not the worst area, but it's not the best area either. Where do I even start? I mean, I grew up, my father left me when I was 3 years old. He just left and never came back. So growing up, I had that struggle of just not knowing who he was, just kind of honestly trying to get a little bit of like tidbits of information here and there about him, and just trying to get like what I can get from my mother. But for the most part, I didn't really know about like who he was, what his name even was, or anything until I was like 7, and I started asking more information. But I had a complex because, I felt, well, why did he abandon me? After a while, I started, realizing that, no one is coming to pick me up. My mom she's in that Queens traffic trying to come towards me. But she's the only, parent in the household. So it would take her really long to come pick me up. Sometimes I would stay at after school and I'd be the last person at after school. And, it was just, really difficult watching all the kids' dads pick all the kids up. And, then I was just there. It was rough on me. And then, my uncle, so I lived with my grandmother, and who also lived there was my uncle and his daughter. My uncle was physically abusive towards me. My uncle was sexually abusive towards me, which was really, really difficult. Just trying to find my way in that environment. I really threw myself into school. I was really good at school. I was, honors and, high, academics, really good with academics. But, it was really hard, just, trying to find my way. My uncle was, also verbally abusive towards me in terms of like, just saying, he would have us watch like that show Beyond Scared Straight. I don't know if you remember that show.
Oh yeah.
Started out as Scared Straight in the 70s, and then it turned into Beyond Scared Straight. But he, would have us watch that show, and, he would just say that like, you see those kids, like you see them, they're not going anywhere, and you're going to be just like them. He'd point to the people that are in prison, and he would say, like that, you see that's where you're going to be. And, one day I remember just not knowing anything about my father, and, my uncle knew my father. They were friends before my mom had actually met my father. And he had said that, he was just like, do you know what your father looks like? And I was just like, no. Me and my brother were just like, no. He said, you want to see a picture of him? We were like, yeah. And then, next thing you know, he turns the phone and it's my father's mugshot. And he's like, that's your dad. And I was like, no, it's not. And, I was like, that's crazy. No, it's not. And I'm like looking at the eyes, and I'm like, he actually does kind of look a little bit like me. And my brother is like, it's his brother. My brother is practically twins with this guy. So, my brother looks at him and he's just like, just astounded. And, he's just like, that's him. And he said, have you ever heard, he said, do you know what bank robbery is? And, we were just like, no. And he said that's when people come into a bank and they, point guns at people and they get, money and the whole thing. And he described that to me. And he said, do you know what your father did? And I was just like, no. And he said he went in with guns and he hopped on the desk and, he pointed the guns at the people. He said that was his role in the robbery. And, then he said, he's in prison. And, so ever since then, we had a certain complex. There was a belief system of like, we're not going anywhere. We're not going to be anybody. We had cousins that were rich and, there was a lot of jealousy towards them because there was an energy of like, they're going somewhere and we're not. And immediately there was almost a sense of like a caste that we were put in where we were not going to rise above that glass ceiling, and we were just going to keep hitting it every time. So yeah, I mean, it was really rough. The sexual abuse didn't start until later on, until I was 13. And my uncle, he would be mean like that when we were younger, but he also had his really nice times and really great times where, he would take us out to go get food. And, I told him, I said, you're like a dad to me. And I trusted him with all my heart. And then, we ended up moving upstate to upstate New York. And that was probably the best thing that could have happened for us because it really made it harder for him to see us. Although, I struggled with depression because, my mom would drive down to the city all day, and she would work all day long. Before that, she would leave us with my grandmother, and so there were other people in the house, but she was like, you're 12 now, you're 13 now, you guys can get yourself on the bus, you guys can do your own thing. And, so we, were left responsible for finding food and, getting ourselves on the bus, getting dressed and, whatnot for school, doing our homework and whatnot. And so, my brother ended up making friends and I didn't. And so I would just be in the house all day long. And so, on the weekends, I would be bullied at school. On the weekends, my uncle would be like, oh, why don't you just come down to the city and, for the weekends. And so I was just like, oh, yeah. And, I'm like, that's who I have. And what ended up happening was he ended up slowly starting to groom me. It was a process of him gaining trust, him isolating me from my family, making me feel like I didn't have anybody. Making me feel like I was the only one that he was doing this to. And, it was a slow process of, I'm going to start to allow you to curse, I'm going to start to allow you to, talk about sexual things, even though I didn't have anything to talk about. He would try to force me to get stuff to talk about and make stuff to talk about. He would start talking about his own sexual conquerings and, he would talk about all his own matters. And then, he lived in my grandmother's attic and that was where he lived. He was in his 40s, 50s, and that was where he lived. He would just try to get me to drink. If it wasn't drinking, it was smoking. And I was 13. And he was trying to get me to smoke. He was trying to get me to drink, not just weed. I mean, like cigarettes, alcohol, hard kinds of alcohol that would get you drunk really fast. I would just say, no, because there was a part of me that didn't really trust him fully. Even though I did trust him in other ways, I didn't trust that he wasn't going to do something to me, which is the saddest thing because to me, he was like a father to me. And he was the only father figure that I had. And with him, he had, just like I said, started telling me those stories, trying to get me to share stories, trying to get me. And then he created this concept of this game called the Circle of Truth, where nothing leaves the circle and everything stays inside the circle and you don't tell anybody. And he would threaten to kill me if I told anybody. Then he started introducing child pornography. showing me, which he was a retired New York City police officer. So, and to this day, he still gets a pension. But he had this, computer with all of these, this information of, little Thai children that were, being with men, all sorts of men of different ages. And it was just insanely, triggering for me. And it was insanely, traumatic for me to sit there and for him to force me to watch that. And then he started showing me videos of him molesting other children that I knew, and videos that he had taken with his girlfriend that I knew, that I loved. And it turned out that she was also doing this as well to her own daughter and grandchild and her own grandson. So seeing that was extremely triggering for me. I did not know what to do. And I almost, I ended up telling somebody else that was also an abuser for me growing up, that I got really close with around the age of 17 anyways, because I didn't really have any good role models or any good, besides my mother and my grandmother. Everybody else was pretty much just, like him. I didn't have friends. I didn't have people. And so I just ended up hanging out with my abusers a lot of the time. And, I ended up telling him, and he ended up telling my mom. But just kind of in the heat of the moment, kind of just like, do you know what your type of illegal material that your daughter watches with your brother? And, he introduced it to my mom, and my mom was just sort of like, what are you talking about? And she fully trusted my uncle. And so to her, it was just like, oh, I'm sure that, he's, fine. I'm sure it's fine. And, I'm sure there's nothing going on. And she thought it was so funny, actually, that she ended up telling my uncle. So now something left the circle of truth. So now I was in trouble. And he ended up calling for all of us to have a movie night, to go to the movies. And he said, you know what, me and Alana are going to go get popcorn. And he took me outside, and he, absolutely yelled at me. He said, this left the circle of truth, and this should not have you broke the circle. I'm going to kill you. If you don't, keep your mouth shut, like he just was absolutely laying it into me. And I was so traumatized that I almost fell into a dissociative amnesia. And for, those of you that don't know what a dissociative amnesia is, it is a form of disassociating that leads you to literally fall into amnesia, where you just don't remember anything. So for years, I didn't remember anything. And this is something that really bothers me because, I was, I had a little cousin who, and, he had a daughter himself, my uncle. And his grandson is my little cousin, and he was 5, and he was running around there, and he, and I wasn't able to protect him during those 8 years that I literally remembered nothing of what happened. And so, yeah, I mean, just a little bit of my childhood, but,
No, I really appreciate you sharing all that and the vulnerability. I want to ask it. Going back to when your father left, what were the feelings like with an absent father? Did you remember anything from 3 years old when he was around?
So no, but I did. There were pictures of him with us. I feel that my memory maybe blocked that out a little bit, just so that, I didn't have to feel so much of the pain, but my brother really did know. My brother was a year older than me. So, he felt that, and he was very traumatized, and just like, daddy, where are you? He'd say, okay, I'm coming, I'm going to come. And then he just wouldn't come. So, my brother was just really, he had to go to therapy for that. Thankfully, I didn't really remember too much of it. But he just didn't come back. And it was something that was just really devastating for us, supposedly. And, at that time, I don't really remember too much of that time. But I just remember this loss of him. I felt this empty. It's funny, I actually had to do a project when I was, I'm going to say maybe 11. I was in 6th grade, and it was just about your family tree and talking about your family. And of course, what I did was I just cut out pictures of me, my mom, and my brother, and I just made this little black construction paper shadow behind me. And my teacher she pulled me aside. She was just like, "This is heartbreaking." That was my reality. So,
Did you feel a sense of guilt, as if maybe you had done something to
wrong.
make him leave?
Yeah, I always felt, well, for one, when he would be on the phone, this is after he had left, but he just never came back again. He would call my mom for pictures to put on his desk to show people. He had actually told me that, he told my mom, he was just like, "Oh, how's Amala doing?" And I'm like,
That's
my
not her
mom is
name.
like, that's.
I'm glad you can laugh about it. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
funny.
yeah.
I'm like, it was a trauma for me back in the day, but my whole family used to just laugh about it. But he's like, "Oh, how's Amala doing?" And my mom's like, "Her name's Alana, first and foremost." Second of all, because he would be like, "Oh, can I see, I want to see Johnny. Johnny's my brother. I want to see Johnny." And he wouldn't, my mom would be like, "Oh, well, Johnny is too traumatized right now, but you can see Alana." And he would be like, "Oh, no, I don't need to see Amala."
Oh my God.
And, because I guess he didn't know me as much or whatever, but, he wasn't even there for my birth. My mom gave birth alone.
Yeah.
By herself, no friends, no family, no anything. So he really wasn't there, for me as much, but, that was heartbreaking as well, of just, and then of course my uncle would tell me that story growing up of, "Oh yeah, he didn't even want to see you. He didn't even have your name right."
Mhm.
He would, you're running around as a kid here and he's out over there on the phone calling you Amala. And he would just say, "I think you have 2 different personalities. I think that you're crazy." And, he would say that, "I think that you are, you don't remember what you do." And he would tell my mom, he's like, "Alana's crazy. Alana lies. Alana does not know what," and he would make all these stories up about me. And I didn't realize that he was also grooming my mom. It was a process of him grooming my mother, so as to make it so that she wouldn't believe me if I was to tell her something about my uncle. So that was the process. That was the whole situation.
What were some of the feelings like? So it sounds like the grooming process, you were in a vulnerable spot. You're a child.
Yep.
You're a child. You're 3 years old when your father left. And then I know you had said 5, 6, 7 is when you started to really, spend time around your uncle.
Yep.
And then the sexual abuse didn't start until 13 years old.
Yeah.
That's 6, 7, maybe even 8 years of grooming.
Yeah.
What did that feel like? Because you were in a vulnerable position. Was it like, was your uncle kind of fulfilling that void you had inside?
Yeah.
And what did that look like?
To me, he was my father. And I remember there were so many good times with him. He would take me out to, go get toys anytime I got student of the month. He would just buy me things. He would just give me $100 sometimes. He was just this person that really made me feel like I had a father. I could pretend with him. And, I remember one day we were building this, it was a dresser in my cousin's room, which is his daughter downstairs. And, I said, this feels like a daddy daughter moment where I'm like, I'm building this dresser with you and I'm reading the instructions and you're putting it together and then I'm doing stuff. And I told him, I said, you're like the father I never had. And he looked at me and he was just like, well, thank you. And it was just a really deep bonding moment that we had. And then, for him to, from that moment on, it was like he was like my father. And then he just turned around, a few years later and did what he did to me. And what happened was I blamed myself. I didn't blame anybody else but myself. I blamed myself because I was like, there's a reason why my father left me. There's a reason why my father didn't want to get on the phone with me and talk to me. There's a reason why my uncle could do this to me. There's something that happened along the way that would make him be able to do this to me. It means that I'm not worthy. It means that I'm not enough. And that's what ended up happening. And, I really ended up going down a very dark path. At the age of 15, during one of those times that I was hanging out with my uncle, the next morning, he has a gun obsession, obsessed with guns.
He was a police officer, right?
He was a police officer.
Yeah.
Yep. So he had, whatever licensure for that. He just had guns. He had like a humongous gun, safe. But he wouldn't keep them in the safe. There was another time when I was 4 when he put a gun to my head. And, cause I had woken him, gone into his room and, into the attic and woken him up. Usually the door was locked and I never knew why. And, I was shaking him and he turned over and he put the gun in my face and I was terrified. And, he was just like, you shouldn't come up here. You shouldn't be coming up here. And, I was just really, shooken and, I had no clue why he would do that. But, to get to the point, he had guns like all the time, just laying around. We were kids. He would have us like, point BB guns at different targets. He would put targets on the wall and he'd just say, just shoot it. And it wasn't even, sometimes he'd give us the real guns and, he would take pictures of my brother putting a gun in his mouth. He would take pictures of, me holding guns and, acting like we're, thugs and whatnot. And, so what happened was, he had a gun just laying on his bed. They're always loaded. They were always loaded and never taught us about gun safety. He told us about guns, but he never taught us about gun safety. So, we could have just shot ourselves at that time. And, I was just upset in my life and I was so depressed at that time. This is when I had 2 other forms of abuse happen to me. One in school. I can't tell you, it was probably like 5 good times when I've been, sexually assaulted, between school, between home, between, going away to another foreign country. It just was a regular thing of my life. It was a regular part of my life and the deflection from other people. But, I had started to wear baggy clothes. So, if you're ever wondering what are some signs of people that are going through sexual abuse, a sign for me was, wearing baggy clothes, not wanting to take showers because I wanted to smell. I wanted to deter you. I wanted to deter men. While most 15-year-old girls were trying to look beautiful and they were trying to get their hair done. And I was so depressed and I was so like isolated that I didn't want that. I didn't want anyone to look at me. And so at that time, that was the time when I was wearing the baggy clothes and I was just really depressed. And, I took the gun and I put it to my head and I pulled the trigger and it didn't go off. And my uncle's guns, he's known for them always being loaded. My uncle, he was obsessed with having the guns loaded so that just in case somebody broke in, he was just very like panicked. And so I pulled the trigger and it didn't go off. And I took that as a sign that I was meant to be here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a very deep moment and a sign from God.
Yep.
What are some other signs that, let's say if there are parents listening to this podcast, this episode, what are some other signs of their child potentially being sexually abused? Because again, you talked about that circle of trust.
Yep.
So verbally, they're not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Verbally, they may think that no one's going to believe them.
Yep.
And that there isn't help available. They're ashamed of it.
Yep.
What are some signs that parents can look out for other than the baggy clothes or deterring men away from them, whether it's by not showering or whatever it may be?
Yep. I would say, some more signs starting when, kids are younger, you're going to get that bedwetting. Around the ages of those younger ages, they're gonna wet the bed, and it's not. It's funny. I didn't know why that was for a long time, and I looked into it, and I found out it does have something to do with the nervous system, and trauma. But they're gonna wet the bed. After that, there is definitely going to be an isolation, just going into themselves, really not talking as much, isolating from friends, from family, maybe acting out behavior-wise. A lot of times there's also modeling. So the kids might model other behaviors that they've seen. So that might be sexual. So, they might be touching themselves, or they might be doing something that it's like, wait, this is beyond their years. They shouldn't know this. And it's really always important for parents to look at the red flags and to just, don't ignore the red flags. Don't just assume, it's just no. It is what you thought it was. It is what you thought it was until you prove that it wasn't. And so that's the number one thing I would say.
What is the best way for someone a loved one to approach someone who they think could be potentially being sexually abused?
Well, I would say, there's just a matter of, getting them to come to you, because there are different types of disclosure. There is, voluntary disclosure, where they will actively come to you and they're choosing to come to you. There's accidental disclosure, where they will, accidentally disclose it by doing something, or, and then it comes out. By, like I said, doing something to themselves, or, doing something to another child. That's the accidental disclosure. And so it's very important to, make sure that you just, like I said, don't ignore any of those red flags. It's important to, come to them and let them know that you are their safe place. And another thing that's very important as well, I forgot who is the author of these books, but there's some new books that are coming out now about sexual abuse, and, this is where safe hands go, or whatever it is. Safe hands should not go in these, I forgot the name of it, but it's all over TikTok, actually. I've been seeing it a lot lately, and it's just like, I'm so happy. But it teaches kids, about who your core 5 people are. These are your 5 people that you can trust. These are your 5 people that, you tell mommy, you tell daddy, you tell whoever, this and that, if somebody does something to you, this is who it is. I think it's all about the pre, getting the kids, pre-ready for, just in case something happens in the future, so that they're ready and the parents are ready later on.
This is where I have experience and I can share. So my daughter is 5. We do the safe people thing with her. And there's 6 of us. It's me, her mother, and then the 4 grandparents.
Yeah.
And she knows, she is fully aware. And it works.
Yeah.
And we've instilled that in her at a very young age. She's 5 now. I think we've been doing it for about 2 years. So when she was 3 years old and really started to become aware of her surroundings and started going to preschool where she was exposed to more people,
Yeah.
strangers in her life, we started that. And
It's really great.
yeah, it's great. The bullying, how did that start for you in school?
Definitely started with, just like I remember when I was in second grade. That was when, I was going to this school called Sacred Heart. And it was in Glendale. And I'm shooting out their name right now. I'm giving them a shout out because it was just so racist. Like my all the parents wouldn't talk to my mom because
Was it all white?
It was all white.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry you had to deal with that.
Yeah, all the parents wouldn't talk to my mom. For one, in the schoolyard, like dropping off the kids, they would clearly avoid her. With me, I remember just walking around the schoolyard during recess and, going up to every kid because, I had trouble making friends before that just because I was just a little bit nervous. But when I went to that school, it was just downright impossible. And I remember, my mom was like, well, you know what, maybe you have to go, move outside of yourself and be a little bit more outgoing and say, hey, do you want to be my friend? And so that's what I would do. I walk around and I would say, do you want to be my friend? Do you want to, or I would say, do you want to, play with me? And, each and every one of them would say, my mommy said, I'm not allowed to play with you because you're Black.
Oh my God.
Each and every single one of them. So I would walk up to each and every, and me being little, I'm just like, I'm 6, I'm 7.
You don't understand. Yeah.
I'm just walking up to, I'm keep trying. And so I'm just like, okay, that it hurts, but then I'm going to like, maybe this one will feel differently. And none of them felt differently. And it was all the same. And so I remember I got to a point to where I reached all the kids and they all said the same thing and they're all playing. And I would just sit on the ground and cry. And I remember the school teachers literally walking past me. I'm crying, a little girl that's crying. And they would just roll their eyes. They wouldn't say anything to me. They would just walk right past me. Some of the older kids, like 8th grade kids, they'd look at me and walk right past me like it was nothing. That was where it started. And then as I got older, I took that with me. And I think that, the bullying, it's a situation where you get bullied at one point in your life. And then, you take those experiences with you. And so I had a complex and I had already had a complex regarding my father and everything. So it was a sense of like, I'm not good enough. No one's going to want to be my friend. No one's going to want to talk to me. And so I, went on, to my other grades and whatnot. I did have a good experience at the next school for a few years, but then, I ended up moving upstate to upstate New York. And, it was the whole thing all over again. I was on the bus. I was older. They were calling me, the N-word.
Oh my God.
They were N-word B. They would call me, they would just, my brother ended up, it's funny because the same bullies were actually my brother's friends. And so it would follow me home because they were neighborhood kids. And so they would call me those names on the bus and they would say like, oh, Alana, where's your dad? Where's your dad? And who's your dad again? And because my brother had told them, because those are his friends, about where my dad was and what was going on with my father. But I didn't say anything to them. And so now my personal business is with the bullies. And so, they'd follow me home. They'd throw sticks at me. They would be like, I'd be in my room. It's so bad that it would just, I'm literally in my room and they're throwing shit at my window. And they come in the house because my brother let them in the house and they're pounding on my bedroom door. And I just remember it was just like 24/7. It was just like harassment and bullying until I finally, told my mom, and my mom is crazy. So she pulled up the car, like they were playing basketball. She like pulled up the car and and she, like
She's
almost
gangster,
crashed
man.
into them. Yeah. And she's like, you and me, we're going to have a talk. And, from that point on, it stopped, but, it was still the energy, you can't get rid of the energy after the bullying as well, where they still hate you, but they're still going to tell other people not to talk to you, but they're not going to do anything anymore. And the repercussions and the consequences that happen after you tell somebody about it. And so, through high school, it was the same thing. I was that girl on the bus that nobody wanted to talk to. I started acting out, maybe being a little weird here and there. But for the most part, I was just me. And, that was my life experience. And, I wasn't able to make friends. Like I said, I had a complex. So when it came to dating, I was, the girl that, I felt like, no one wanted to be with me. No one wanted to go ask me out. That was my, experience of just feeling like, I'm invisible here. And I feel that invisible is the worst level of depression that you could feel. Because that means that you don't feel that you matter. That means that you feel like your death would not hurt anybody else. And that means that it's just like the worst stage of depression. And so that was around those times. That was when I tried to kill myself. I had also tried to swallow pills when I was 13 as well. So, and my uncle was just like, why didn't you do it? And, I was on the phone with him, and, he would just, be saying that he's, jerking off to my voice on the phone. And, it was just a continuous, even when I would leave, it was just continuous bullying and
abuse,
sexual abuse, and all sorts of stuff. And so that was my life for years, Then, there was also the bullying that I endured with my own brother. My brother and me are very close now, but he's making up for a lot of the years that he was bullying me along with those bullies in high school. And, he was just very, verbally abusive towards me. He called me piggy. He would just say, like, no one's going to really want you. And, no one is going to ask you out. Why would you even think somebody's going to ask you out? And I don't know. He was just, he acknowledged it later on, but he was a very unhappy person himself. And, he had later on become suicidal. And, very depressed. And it turned out that he had been abused by my uncle as well. But he still has not come out with that, but we know.
Yeah.
And, he ended up getting into drugs. And, drugs are still his problem to this day. He still struggles. He's, on and off the wagon. And, but he's so nice to me now. We went through a really, really rough period. But he had realized what he did wrong, and, he's really good to me now. And he realized that we're really in this together.
When you had the incident where you put the gun to your head and pulled the trigger and it was not loaded, that moment that you realized you were supposed to be here on earth and stay alive, what happened after that?
So it was really, I was still depressed for a very long time. I had, issues all the way up until I would say maybe age 19, 20, where I was very depressed. I, couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't, just, there was the feelings of like, why, aren't I good enough? And I had severe anxiety. It almost felt like, I was almost living in a veil, it's a strange way to describe my life, but it was a sense of like a skewed reality. where I couldn't remember what had happened to me with my uncle. But I was just, trying to get attention a lot of the time. I would, sleep around with different guys, and
Mhm.
it was just my reality that I was, just not good enough. And, I was just being treated really badly in all my relationships, whether it be physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. It was like this, everybody was a carbon copy of my uncle. And, after that, it was, for a very long time, it was just very low. But at the age of 17, I will say I did start my nonprofit for children of incarcerated parents. And it's called Alana Wilson's Helping Hands Village. And I started it at my church that I was going to, because I had a foster parent of my friend's foster parent, had invited me to their church one day. And I went, and it was such a great experience. And I had actually had to do a project in school regarding, everything under the umbrella of family dynamics. And I had chosen children of incarcerated parents because, my father was incarcerated. Even though he had abandoned me, he was incarcerated. And I had known about this incarceration. And, he was, in and out of my life, but from the time I was 15. But, it was still, an incarceration nonetheless. And, I started it, and I found out all these really interesting statistics. I found out that 70% of children that are children of incarcerated parents are bound to follow in their parents' footsteps, which is insane. That means that more than half, a whole bunch more than half, are going to go to jail too. So that it's the continual cycle of incarceration. And it's because of other factors that are at play. It's because of, a lot of times there's foster care that's also in correlation with that as well. It's also there's a correlation between foster care. There's a correlation between mental health issues, and there's a correlation even between diabetes and children of incarcerated parents, because there's no one at home to make sure that the kids are eating correctly. There's just a high correlation between gangs and joining gangs and everything, because of the fact that their father is away, and there's a pain of some of them. Thankfully, I'm really grateful that I didn't have to see my father being arrested. But there's some kids that do have it worse, and that did have to see their parent being arrested. So I just found out all this information. And I was just really just astounded. And so, Alana Wilson's Helping Hands Village was born from that situation. And depression, it was always something that I struggled with no matter what. But it was, while that was going on, I was also rebuilding my life, and, starting new, and, getting to a happier place.
Your nonprofit, you are raising money. What does the money go towards? So so basically you guys are trying to lower that statistic from
Yeah.
70% to even if it's 1%, you guys are still helping someone.
Yeah, exactly.
What is the money going towards to help lower that percentage?
So the money is going towards, so I'll tell you about the nonprofit itself.
Yeah, please.
And this would be what the money is going towards. So we have individualized age programs with individualized age groups for kids of all age ranges, from cradle to career. And we actually have it's therapeutic workshops taught by people with mental health backgrounds. So mental health counselors that are, they could be, a psychology student, they could be, LCSW, social worker, they could be just a counselor in general, somebody with a mental health background. And so what we're doing is the workshops they teach art therapy. They teach basically helping kids to work through the complex emotions that they might be experiencing and they might not have a name for, because that's exactly what it is. Pain isolates. Pain isolates and makes you feel like you don't have anybody, and it almost silences you. So what I'm trying to do, my work is counteracting that experience, by helping kids label their pain, helping kids to find a name for what it is that they're doing. So what it is, so we have bunnies, which is ages 0 to 3. We have, and it's all over the nation. So we have grasshoppers 4 through 6. We have bunnies 7 through 9. We have what's after that? Preteens 10 through 12. Early teens, I'm thinking 13 through 15. And then late teens 16 through 17, and then adults. So we even have workshops for adults as well to talk through the issues, in their experiences from their own childhood. So we have that we do. We also have this program at Danbury Library as well as New Britain Library, up and coming in New Britain Library, called Little Humans, Big Emotions. And what we do is we teach kids about complex life scenarios that might just be too much beyond their years, but we kind of make it age appropriate for them. And we explain it to them in an age appropriate way. And we also do a craft with them. So last month, September, we did, that's this month actually, but we did A Terrible Thing Happened by Margaret Holmes. And we read the book. I read the book to the kids, and then we did a monster worry box craft where the kids can put all their worries in the worry box and they can keep it at home, and it's safe with their adult at home and their parent. And then we also have annual Put Your Best Foot Forward Day events, where the kids they have mentors that teach them how to tie, how to tie their shoes. They can get their hair cut for free. They can get their hair styled for free. There's free pizza, free ice cream, and we do this in low-income developments all over Connecticut. So that is really something that I just took my own experience and the things that I was missing in my childhood, and I, targeted my, these experiences for these kids towards that, what I was missing, as well as just doing my research on kids as well, in these situations and scenarios. And, the whole family is involved. My whole family is involved. And, everyone, obviously, we broke away from my uncle eventually. My uncle, he was almost going to go to jail, but it turned out that my statute of limitations had run out on that situation because it had been 8 years. And, I couldn't do anything. And it turned out, I ended up telling his daughter, and it turned out that he actually had done it to his daughter as well, who had, her mother had abandoned her because her mother was a prostitute and her mother was a stripper. And her mother couldn't take care of her anymore because the courts took her away from her mother, because of her sister had actually she shipped her other daughter off to California, and the daughter ended up coming back. She was 3 years old. She ended up coming back with herpes.
Oh.
And courts immediately took the other daughter away, which is my cousin, and placed her with my uncle. And then he ended up abusing her from eight and on. But it was a situation where she had made a decision to stand by my uncle, to forgive my uncle. And, she had this sick idea that I was going to forgive him too. And this has just been from years that she'd been, abused for years, and brainwashed for years, by my uncle. So there's irreparable damage done to her, and she will definitely never be the same. And we had realized this afterwards, by her reaction and her response. She cut off the whole family. And she cut me off. And, it turned out he actually did it to her cousin as well, her cousin. And, she cut that cousin off, told the whole family that she, was stealing from old people or something. And that's what had happened with that situation. But that wasn't even true. It just made it so that we would hate her and we wouldn't want her in our lives. And, until later on, I ended up reconnecting with her. And she said, yeah, he did it to me too. And she didn't want me to, he was keeping me quiet by paying my college. So, it just, he knows who he was picking. But, the situation that I ended up opening up a case, for, child services, for my cousin. And, she never forgave me for that, my cousin. And, even though we grew up like sisters, she always hated me. And I think it was because he was, trying to pit us against each other. And it was funny because both of us thought we were the only ones besides her and her cousin. And so, he was pitting us against each other. And, that was the situation.
The scary thing here is also he is a position of authority. He was a police officer.
Yeah.
So you're not only is he your uncle, but there is, any child you're taught in school, police officers are safe.
Yeah.
Right? Firefighters.
And to
they're
me,
safe.
they never were. They never were because of who he was. Even before he started the sexual abuse, he was just still a very violent person. He was physically abusive to me. I remember there was a time when I was, I never liked cheese. My whole life I've never liked cheese. And my grandmother, I didn't eat it for dinner. So my grandmother put it out for me in the morning and to eat. And he, found out that I wasn't going to eat it. And I said I didn't want to eat it. And, he slapped me across the face so hard. And, my whole body jerked. And I was just, in shock. And, he put his, roughed me up a little bit, grabbed the scruff of my shirt. And he said, you're going to eat this. And, I said, I want my mom. And because my mom was she was not there, she was, at work. And she was, always not there for the most part during the day, she'd come back at night. And, he's just like, well, your mom is not here. And he said, you're going to eat this. And I said, no, I'm not. And I just outright refused to eat it. And he just kept on slapping me. And I was just like, I'm not going to eat it. And, he was always abusive to my brother, physically. My brother actually got beat because my mom was upstairs and she had actually found my cousin's underwear under my uncle's bed. And she had my mom, immediately thought like, oh, it must be Johnny, Johnny that brought this up here and whatnot. And it obviously that wasn't the case. It was that he was abusing my cousin as well. And, my uncle ended up beating my brother for doing that, for bringing the underwear and putting it under the bed, even though he knew full well that it was him that was doing it. So, it's just a really messed up situation. And, my brother, he still has scars to this day. He still has things that he just does not admit to. Police have tried to interrogate him, and, get information out of him, because they're like, we're going to have to, ask him questions, and we're going to also have to ask, this little boy questions that's still living in this house that my cousin is still dropping off to his house, for him to babysit. And, that was the situation.
Aside from the nonprofit and helping other people, which is absolutely amazing, and I commend you for it, you're in a great place today.
Yeah.
How did you get to that place where you're at today internally?
It was definitely work. I ended up joining a trauma group. And still to this day, it's for sexual abuse survivors. You never stop healing. Your job is never done. You will always have it that it'll be in the back of your mind. But I really just rose above the situation and realize that, this was never about you. It was never your fault. I feel that was something that was very important for me to understand, is that it was never my fault. And, I really just worked through it slowly, every day, just getting up every day and just telling myself that, you know what, this was not my fault. And I think that that's the number one thing, because then you're not a victim anymore. Then you're not pinned down by this idea that all these things that are happening to you are happening to you. I really got into spirituality. And I just realized that, the things that happen to you actually happen for you. And the things that happened to me were they happened for me so that I could help other people. I would describe myself as somebody that is just very seasoned. And I say this not just culturally, but I mean this in the way of I have so many different spices of experience that I'm seasoned with. I've been overweight. I've gone through that as well. I have been, depressed. I've struggled with sexual abuse. I've struggled with, even a little bit of an eating disorder at one point in time. I've struggled with being bullied. I've been bullied. I've been in toxic relationships, and like there's so many different things that I've been through. I've had a father abandon me. I've had an incarcerated parent. So these experiences help me to be able to help other people, and I feel that helping other people is my therapy. It helps me to feel better, and it helps me to help other people. It helps me to feel better about myself.
Self-esteemable acts.
Yeah.
I always say that on this show. If you could give one piece of advice to the listener who is going through what you went through at an early age, what would it be?
You are enough. You are worthy. You don't deserve this. And you don't deserve what happened to you, and you don't deserve what might even actually be happening to you right now. And there's a need for you to tell somebody. Always tell somebody. I waited too long. But even if it doesn't, it's too late, for a statute of limitations, in your state or whatever your situation is. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to the police, because it just depends on your situation and your scenario and what's right for you and your mental health journey. It might not be right for your mental health journey to be, poked and prodded by, professionals and that are, lawyers that are trying to, defense attorneys that are trying to prove, defend, your abuser, and you have to stand in court and be in front of this person. But it's better. It's good to at least come out with the scenario with the situation. Tell your friends, your family, tell all the people that know this person, so that, because you never know if this person is doing this to somebody else. So it's always important to just stand up and say something. Eventually, right when the time is right, don't be mad at yourself for not having said anything. You're all human. I would just say that you are better than this, and you can come back from this, whether it be with medication, whether it be with therapy. You can come back from this.
Well, you're living proof.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and the vulnerability. You're an amazing person, and you help a lot of people. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.